Okay, so in terms of the documentation that is important, we've discussed this already, but this is just another recap of that. The permanent employee file. Okay, if this is computerized, usually that would then be the sort of like the master file of the employee. If any of the details of the employee changes, whether it's just the marital status, and the employee is now all of a sudden divorced, that is important. That needs to be documented as well, because that could have other implications. There could be a divorce order where they need to pay, where you as the employer need to deduct alimony for the other spouse in terms of a divorce order from the court. Or it could be that the employee's pension payout nomination of the beneficiaries changes if they need to remove their spouse, something along those lines. So it is important information. These change forms or these amendment forms, that needs to be pre-numbered so that as the auditors and even management themselves could do a sequential check at any point in time to just check or verify whether these forms are still complete. Okay, the important one there would be the bank account information. Okay, if let's say a payroll clerk would want to commit fraud, it would be possible to just fill in a change form, change the banking details of one employee to his own bank account details, and then that is then processed and the salary of that employee is paid over to him. Or create a fictitious employee on the system and then input his own bank account. Okay, the clock cards or the smart cards, pay slips, the pay packets. The pay packet is just basically your wages and any other documentation that would be important for the employee when he is collecting his monthly or weekly wages or salary. Okay, tax certificates, that's usually issued annually only when the employees are busy preparing their annual income tax return. Okay, and then the deduction returns. The deduction returns, like we said, pay as you earn, medical aid, that needs to be on file as well. Okay. Okay, we've talked about each phase in the cycle, and we've talked about what is the use of HR and timekeeping, prep, the payout and the deduction. And we've spoken about the documentation you'd expect, what are the risks if that function is not present, as well as the types of controls you'd expect. Okay, so these questions are important for you to ask yourself. Okay, when you are thinking about the controls that should have been implemented, perhaps you are asked in the test or the exam to identify weaknesses, then you need to know why is these functions or departments important. Okay, and what are the risks, what are the documentation, so that you're able to make firstly identify the weaknesses and identify recommendations for any controls that you see would be missing in that specific function. Okay, just a reminder of our control objectives: validity, accuracy, recording, completeness, cutoff, and presentation and disclosure. And then very importantly, the verbs, the audit verbs that we use. We inspect a document, we observe a procedure, we reperform / recalculate a calculation, okay, or a reconciliation, and we inquire from a person. Okay, please note that these verbs are very important, and I do not want to say any student using the word ensure. Okay, you as the auditor, you cannot ensure anything because it is not your responsibility. Okay, it is management's responsibility to implement controls. Okay, if you are finding that you use the word ensure a lot, or you write it out in your solutions a lot, I find a very good substitute would be verify or assess or evaluate. If you want to write to ensure that, ask yourself if to verify that or to assess that or to evaluate that, if that would then not be more useful. Okay, and just another reminder, the direction of testing is very important. Okay, depending on whether you have a debit balance or a credit balance, the direction of testing is important. Okay, so that you ensure that you use the auditor, you need to address the audit procedure that you designed needs to address the assertion. Okay. Okay, so for substantive procedures, you need to think about the assertions. Remember, we have different assertions for classes of transactions and account balances. Okay, you should have covered general audit procedures, and just remember there are always marks available for general procedures unless we specifically say do not concern yourself with any general audit procedures. But these general audit procedures do need to be made applicable to the cycle or the transaction or the balance specifically. Okay, so you need to be able to apply it and not just give a theory dump of general procedures. Okay, most of the time the general procedures are limited to between 2 to 3 marks. Okay, so do not spend 3 pages on general procedures just writing it out or regurgitating it in a different way. Okay, direction of testing. Okay, so if we're looking at our class example, okay, we're looking at a motor dealership. In terms of their payroll costs, they have 35 employees, 27 of which are salaried employees, admin staff, and then 8 of which are salespeople. Okay, so staff are paid a salary as per their employment contracts. However, the sales staff not only have a basic salary, but they do also earn a 5% commission on all new sales. Okay, so we're looking at a salary cost of around 23.5 million, and so we are required to perform the substantive procedures in order to have audit comfort over this salary amount. Okay. So your approach for answering this question would be to think of the transactions that are related to this amount. Is it a transaction alone, or does it create balances in the statement of financial position as well? Okay, and then you ask yourself, what are the main risks associated with these costs if it's just transactions, and with the balance as well, should there be a balance? Okay, obviously that will then lead you to the assertions, and together with that, the direction of testing, depending on whether you just have transactions, whether it's just a debit in the case of salary costs, or you may have an account balance sitting on there as well. Okay. So in terms of your general substantive procedures, we have said before that when you are giving general substantive procedures in any test or exam, you need to make it specific. Okay, so it's not just a theory dump, you need to apply it to the specific account transactions or the account balance that you are testing. Okay, and remember, like we've said before, maximum 2 to 3 marks. If, let's say, the required has about 30 marks for the substantive procedures, we might push the general substantive procedure mark allocation up to about 5, but 5 is usually the maximum. Normally it's about 2 to 3. Okay, so obtaining an understanding of the company's policies, okay, with respect to their payroll structures. Okay, this is important because it also is one of the first steps that needs to be done when you are testing the controls as well. Okay, so you are going to make a lot of inquiries in order to obtain an understanding. What is the current year salary structure? Have there been any increases, any bonuses, new appointments, terminations? What are the HR policies, for example, with relating to leave days, if you should perhaps have a leave provision? All of those types of questions you need to ask of the client. Okay, remember, we need to consider the results of our test of controls and in general the overall effectiveness of the control environment. Okay, that is going to determine how much substantive testing we need to be able to do. Okay, then one of the important substantive procedures for salaries would be analytical procedures. Okay, in this case, analytical procedures are quite useful for identifying whether or the extent of further substantive procedures. Okay, because if you start off with prior salaries as a base, okay, and you adjust for any current year salary increases, any new appointments, any terminations that may have happened during the current year, you should then get back to estimate, okay, or an expectation of the current year salaries. Okay, and you compare that to what is actually being recorded in the GL or the TB, and then that would then indicate whether there's any abnormalities or unusual items that then need further investigation. So it's quite a good audit procedure to do on salary specific, because it would then guide the auditor in terms of any further audit procedures that need to be done and the extent thereof. Okay, so this list of salaries or the salary calculations, this could just be the GL if it is a smaller organization, but if it is a large organization, they may have separate software for salaries and payroll costs in general. Usually in the Namibian market so far, most employers use VIP, okay, the Sage software, or some of them also do use Pastel Payroll. Okay, so if you have this list of costs per employee in the separate software, remember we also need to agree that to the GL and the TB as well. Okay, just for completeness. Okay, so you're going to do some testing for the accuracy thereof. You're going to do some casting, reperforming of some of the calculations, and like I said, you do need to trace it back to the GL, to the TB, and to any sub-ledgers as well. Okay, if you are in terms of your general procedures, if you obtain a management representation letter, please be very specific with respect to which assertions and which accounts. Okay, so do not just state that obtain a management rep letter and then you expect marks for that. Okay.